Welcome to Finding Contentment, the official podcast of the American Institute of Stress. The goal of this podcast is to explore the science, psychology, and practical wisdom that can help us manage our stress. If you are looking for personal growth and professional success, or just want a more fulfilling life, visit us at stress.org. And now here is the host and executive director of the American Institute of Stress, Will Heckman.
Hey, greetings, everyone. This is your host and executive director for the American Institute of Stress. It's Will Heckman. Thanks for joining us once again on Finding Contentment, the official podcast for the American Institute of Stress. And I'd like to ask you, if you're listening to this podcast today, go to stress.org. Subscribe to our magazine, check out all the information we have about stress and all the stress-related issues. And if you're watching us, you know I'm going to ask you, please take a moment, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel. It helps us to grow. Hey, today we're going to be talking about creating stronger family bonds. And while we all know that family dynamics can often be a double-edged sword when it comes to stress, on one hand, family relationships can be a source of tension, whether from conflicts or misunderstandings or the pressures of meeting expectations. On the other hand, family is frequently our sanctuary during difficult times, especially, and they provide a sense of belonging, emotional support, and a foundation for resilience when stress becomes just overwhelming. Our guest today recently wrote an article for Contentment magazine. Again, you can find that at stress.org, where she wrote, "Every family has its own identity. Values, traditions, energy levels, strengths, how they relate to one another, and how they view themselves, and the specific family bond." Because joining us today is Dr. Nancy Jernigan. And Nancy is an internationally recognized leader and educator known for leadership, development, and developing healthy teams amid growth and change. And she is the president and co-founder of Hidden Valley Group, and serves as the board member and finance director for Olive Branch International. Together, those two organizations provide healthcare and education, leadership development, and family support in risk and conflict zones on 3 different continents. Nancy gets personally involved internationally in teaching and training as a mental wellness expert, treating trauma and stress disorders, and also as an executive coach, leadership expert, and educator. She's passionate about developing, multiplying leaders, making more leaders, which we need. Nancy's also the co-author of Thin Spaces, Recognizing When God Breaks Through, which I believe was just released not that long ago. And she's also written for Contentment magazine, which I mentioned, which we publish here at the American Institute of Stress. And we're very proud to say that she is a fellow for the American Institute of Stress. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nancy Jernigan. Nancy, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks, Will. It's great to be with you. It's great to talk about hope and resilient families and how they can have stronger bonds, and look forward to our conversation today.
Thanks. You know, after reading your article, I really wanted to talk to you about it. It's taken a while to be able to do that, but I'm glad we're getting the chance today. I wanted you to take a moment, if you could, because you've seen a lot. We've talked about it before, and if you could describe for our audience just a challenging experience that a family has gone through and how it initially affects that family.
Sure. Yeah. You know what, just kind of before I describe the story, when we're talking about resilience families, I'm going to give a story. It'll give kind of some specifics on how to handle the stress and how to have hope and how to be resilient. But every family is going to handle things differently. And so I hope these stories that we'll talk about will apply and be inspirational to someone. But we're also going to talk about how people take a journey in a different way through stress, trauma, grief, that all these things can apply to people differently. But I was coaching this woman named Mary, and her family actually went through a very poignant example of experiencing trauma and grief. We don't always, trauma is not always grief, but really there is normally an aspect, a strong aspect of grief that goes along with trauma. And this family, the whole family was actually affected. Mary is not her real name. I just used that name for the story. But Mary's high school-age son suddenly passed away on the athletic field with friends surrounding him. And it was completely unexpected. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking for the family, traumatic for them, traumatic for the whole surrounding community. Many people saw this happen. Other children, high school students saw this happen. And so the trauma actually and grief extended much greater than the family and the immediate family. And so as they were dealing with their trauma, one of the interesting examples that came to fruition is in the healing process, the mother, who we'll call Mary, had a unique way of dealing with her grief. She had never been a painter in the past, but found this new skill, found this new process of art and creativity that she could find joy and meaning, and she could help heal herself. And then she found out by painting, she spent hours in her garage creating stories. Through her painting, she could help others. One very key important part of trauma is as you're going through it, when you're ready to be able to serve others, help others, is a really important part of the healing process. And so painting in her garage, creating stories with her paintings, she both experienced healing and hope, as well as offered healing and hope to others. Her paintings included stories of hope and angels. Angels was kind of one of the key things she would paint about. She found that as she created beauty and people acknowledged the beauty, she was finding beauty in the pain. Amidst the pain, she found beauty. But every family member of this family did not, go that direction, did not heal in that same way. And so respecting one another was a key thing that we talked about as she went through this process. How the children, there were three other children who had to experience grief and the trauma. So, a journey of trauma and grief is messy, right? And so they're bright parts of a journey, and then hard and sad and very difficult parts of a journey. So this family worked through conflict, disagreements. How are we going to heal? How are we going to heal together? The husband actually was just a wonderful strength for the family, and he found his best way of dealing with the intense pain was to bring hope to others as well. But he shared the story, and he hoped that people would find hope in God and understand the strength of God. And so that's how he kind of addressed his need to help others in the middle of healing himself. The children were going through school. They were distracted as well as had real, school responsibilities. So they all healed at different times. And,
It's funny, but your analogy that she painted angels and things like that. Even if you're not a religious person, and not everyone is, it's the symbol of it. It's the symbol of hope.
Right.
And in my wife's a painter also not for she just paints, she just likes to, but I think that's a great way for her to work through that grief, because she could talk about those paintings with her family and discuss her emotions in creating that.
Right.
And you're right, everybody does handle it different.
Well, you've probably seen this firsthand with your wife, that, in fact, we all can learn from your wife, from Mary's experience, that creativity, art, and painting are actually a key part of post-traumatic growth. They're a key part of improving our mental health and wellness in beautiful and profound ways, processing the trauma. It lowers anxiety. It can increase our moods, improve our moods, give us vision for the future. You probably watch this with your wife painting.
Sure. Oh yeah.
You vision certain things and you can see a future and a hope, and good for both children and adults to be able to express that creativity.
And I'm so in awe of people who can do that. Being a person who I can do crafts, but I can't paint. I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
being able to just create something on a blank canvas. So, at one time I did photography, and here is the
Oh,
difference.
right.
And to show you, just to discuss that particular thing, a photographer takes everything in the world and eliminates things until he has what picture he wants. And a
Mhm.
painter has a blank canvas and adds things until they have that picture. To me,
Yes.
that is a great talent.
Yes.
Since we're talking about families, let me ask you this, because in this particular case, and in cases like it, when families go through something like grief, do you think that the generation makes a difference? In other words, mom and dad go through it one way, and other kids who were school age, I believe you said.
Mhm.
Do you think they have to process it another way? How do we never teach them to do that?
Definitely. There's similarities, like this idea we just talked about with art, but completely the different generations will process trauma differently. One thing we realized about the school age children is they needed their friends maybe even more than mom and dad, even though mom and dad relied on friends a lot. That was a part of the process. Teens, children need friends desperately in this process.
Yeah.
They We've talked about processing in the past, and children will process differently with their friends. Some of it is a distraction, but some of it is they're figuring things out in the moment as well.
Right.
So friends are maybe even more important to children.
That's a good point. And you're right. Everyone needs a support system, and your friends are
Yes.
included in that. But at a younger age, I think you're right, that support system becomes more paramount, more important than almost any other age.
Yeah. And
If
then the
nothing else,
real,
because of life experience.
right,
Yeah.
right. And they can't articulate, depending on the age of the child, they can't articulate the same. And so they work it out differently.
Right. And you know what? We lack as parents teaching our children how to process something like this.
Mm,
Think about it.
right.
When you're a little girl or a little boy and your dog dies,
Mm,
your parents say, "Don't cry, honey. We'll get you another puppy." So what they're saying is don't have emotions and we'll replace it, which when we grow up, we find doesn't work well with people. So I think having an understanding of things like this, and you guys out there listening to what Nancy is saying, we have to address it, even with kids, even if it's a goldfish. So,
yeah.
one of the other things I wanted to ask you is, well, since we're talking about families, is their identity. That family we call it a family unit.
Mhm.
And when they're going through a challenging experience, it doesn't have to be grief; it could be anything. Um, how does that identity? How is that affected as a family unit because they go through that experience together?
Well, many things happen in that process. Many things change and shift in the middle of trauma and stress and grief. And so, like you just gave the example of a pet dying,
Mm.
even a dog dying, really, they're all going to have different experiences and thoughts about what's going on. And coming together, like I like how you brought that up, Will. Ideally, you want to come together and share your thoughts, share your feelings, and you want to be able to say, you're safe. This is our safe home. Yeah, this is a place where we want to, you called it a sanctuary. That was such a great word. It's a sanctuary. So during these shifts of a family, what they can be feeling because they're going through trauma, You want to let them be able to process and articulate their thoughts. Energy levels will be different. We talked about that a little bit. So one child or person, one adult may have high energy, another may have less.
Right.
We got to respect that. So those things can change and shift through trauma. Patience, it can go from both ends with patience. Someone can have less patience, someone can have more patience. You can have less patience because of the trauma, and so certain things trigger you. And then a family can talk about, we're going to have more patience with each other because of what we've been through. And you talk it through. That doesn't always come up at the dinner table, right? I mean, sometimes it does. But to say we want to be a resilient family, and a resilient family is patient with one another. They respect each other's process and grieving. And so those things aren't always talked about when trauma isn't existing. And so when you asked about the identity, a family's identity can literally change and shift significantly because new attributes start coming to the surface.
You know, what comes to mind also to me, all the things that you were saying are right on point, is where do we, as parents, as the older people in that family unit, draw the line between wanting to protect the younger ones from pain and teaching them resilience by having them go through it? That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want my kid really to experience this, but if I don't let them, then they're not part of our families becoming resilient. It's a very, very complicated situation, you know.
Well, one of the things we talk about, this is a great point, Will, is you want your children to be safe and protected. But at the same time, when we talk about post-traumatic growth, going through hard things will actually build character, will build strength and resilience. So trying to protect them from too much the line will be different for every family, but we have to be very careful that we're not crossing boundaries and not letting them just live with some of the consequences of decision making, and accepting who they are and letting their character. Different. Yeah, right.
It might be different for, say, your wife and husband. They might have different ideas on how to do it. My wife and I may have been called an overprotective dad once or twice, but my opinion was, okay, let her fail in a padded cell. You know, that was it. But I don't know if that was the right thing to do. You know, you've seen so many families go through so much trauma and so many stressful events in their lives. Sometimes you have no choice because you can't hide it from your kids. So you maybe teaching them is the right thing to do when you have the opportunity.
Well, when a family's not sure what to do, you know, I think we've talked about this before. You bring in a counselor and figure out what's a good family system process, and how do we bring in a counselor to help us develop family values and to understand how we parent well. Maybe it's a parenting class, maybe it's a parenting community class or a class at our church, because we have to be very careful with boundaries, that we don't protect our children so much that they're not prepared for the future. They need to be prepared for the future. That's part of our job as mom and dad, to prepare them for the future. But at the same time, you want a strong family bond that emphasizes this is a safe place. So every family is going to live that out a little differently, but pulling in a counselor, pulling in good parenting classes will help you for the future.
You know, it's a great point. You know, maybe part of the responsibility of being the head of the household, or the leaders of the household, the adults, is knowing when to call in a professional. It's, if I broke my daughter broke her arm, I took her to a doctor. If we're going through, something that is beyond my understanding or my training or capabilities in an event that's happening, it might be time to bring in a professional then too.
Mhm.
It's one of the ways we move on, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. There are some key things a family has to do to be able to move from a place of struggle to find their strength and resilience. Give us some ideas. What are some of the things they can do? We talked a little bit about it. You mentioned a few, but are there other key things that families who are listening, who are going through a real stressful event in their family can do?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind when we talk about post-traumatic growth and resilient families is good family routines. And if there's a family in the middle of trauma right now who's listening and they're saying, where do I start? Some good, healthy routines to make sure they're in place. When is homework being done? When is dinner coming together? When is playtime? When, as a family, are we having fun and laughing? And even if it's tough. So coming up with your own set of routines that give structure within flexibility, not too stringent, there's flexibility, but some structure in the middle of trauma is super important. Another thing that we talk about oftentimes is an increased amount of communication. So when you're talking about routines and family and dinner time and fun together, that communication, repeating over and over how you love one another, especially mom and dad, how we love you kids and how important you are, repeating really important communication pieces.
You brought up something that I'm a big believer in. I'm a big believer in structure, and I think it's always helpful. I think it negates confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
and when we're talking about something like this, where a family goes through whatever event they're going through, to keep that structure going helps that family return to whatever their normalcy or their new normal is going to
Right.
be.
New normal.
And that in itself is a way of healing, to feel that return to who I am and who my family are, and
Yeah.
things like that. You
And
know,
even that, you say who we are, it actually may look different, and saying that's okay. That the family looks different today than they did a month ago.
right.
That's okay. We want to find that positive, that new ideas, the new possibilities, the new futures. Um, but in the same time, we're still who we are. We're still that family unit. We still have certain values that we stick to. And so some things not changed, but if they're going to change because of the trauma they've been through, that's okay. They don't have to necessarily go back. The newness is where moving forward, and that idea of moving forward is really critical, even though they want some kind of patterns and, as we talked about, some kind of routines that are healthy and good for the family.
And that constantly changes anyway, even without
Right,
a traumatic experience. Your
right,
normalcy is going to change. Your you get to different places in your life.
right,
Kids grow up and they move out. It's all those things happen anyway.
right,
So there's a new
right,
normalcy. So I think if we not only practice this when negative things happen, but we should also practice it when positive things happen.
right.
And I always was a big believer in referring to, and it sounds kind of silly, but referring to our family as the family, the Heckman family. We're going to get together and Heckman's going to eat, and so to
Right,
give
right.
that sense of identity,
Yes.
um, you know, I thought it was helpful. I don't know if the rest of them would think so, but I think it was. And you have witnessed not only like what you and I or other people would consider normal struggles.
Yes.
You have witnessed some wars, famine,
Yeah.
pestilence. I mean, I feel like I'm reading this out of the Bible. It's the 10 plagues. And you have been there when families have gone through these struggles. I I I know the families can depend on each other, but who else can they depend on or look to for support to encourage? Let's say that some of the things you've been through, the family goes through a trauma because of an event. It could be a flood, a hurricane. You've seen it
Yeah.
all, my God, Nancy. But that event ends. What support do they look to after that event that can heal them after that trauma?
Right. Well, we started talking about pulling in a counselor, and we talked about being able to maybe go to classes like parenting classes. So if it's the whole family, counseling is excellent. I know we can keep talking about that as well, but maybe it's community groups or church gatherings or a way to serve. So these outside resources are places to kind of feed their fullness of life and being able to serve and heal outside of the family as well. Sports, both adults and children being involved in sports and community sports,
Yeah.
or being on teams where you feel a part. We've talked about belonging and how important it is for a family to feel that belonging when you're home, but belonging in your community is a very important part of gaining stability and working through trauma and not working through depression. If someone's been through depression, feeling of belonging is critical.
Yeah.
So whether it's a sports team or a community service or figuring out how to go serve others in your community, just putting boxes together to send off to other places, those kind of things, being active in your community reduces stress, it brings belonging, it brings a feeling of I'm helping others as well as moving through my own stress.
That's so true. I mean, it really is so true. My wife and I I'm involved in a lot of charity events, and you said putting boxes together. Well, we've gone and put boxes together for Forgotten Soldier Outreach. You spend the night just
Yes.
putting it together. And,
Right.
when the organizer wasn't looking, I'd stick extra stuff in there. One
Right,
soldier,
right.
it was great. We did it together. And
Right.
your analogy with the sports thing, it's not just playing. You all don't have to be
Right.
athletes.
Right.
You can all
Right.
be a fan of the same football team.
Right.
Not my
Right.
football team because they're really bad, but
Uh-oh.
a good
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Even if,
Yes.
but you know what? Even if they're bad and you're suffering together, it brings you together and it gives you something to do and it makes you part of a larger community. That's a great
Right.
idea. I love that
Right.
idea. And I think people that, you know, you can find something.
Right.
Um,
Right. Well, and that exercise, it's both the people being together as well as we could talk about, the idea behind good nutrition, exercise, good relationships, and good working relationships. All of those are critical to responding to trauma and growing through with good mental health platforms and good mental health processes. And that exercise is key. It really helps your mind shed stress.
yeah.
Literally, you shed stress as you exercise, or maybe putting a box together, even just moving around and standing up, moving in general. All that is critical for the healing process.
And you know what? It doesn't have to be like you all have to be. My family played tennis together, and I was an
Yeah,
athlete. My wife was an athlete. My daughter,
yeah,
not so much. But going to watch her play was awesome.
Right, right.
But you could
Sharon.
always find an activity
Yeah.
to do together. Imagine if you guys out there are watching and you're going through something as a family and you all got together and just took a walk on the
Yes.
beach, walk through
Right,
the woods.
right.
And that I think that's just as much
Yes.
as a family being able to develop something together
Right.
brings that
Well, Will,
cohesiveness.
you've brought up a great point because even walking on the beach or
Yeah.
walking, when we're sitting in an office or kids are sitting in a schoolroom, to get out and get your head up and looking in the sky, that actually helps our brain. There's functions in our brain that respond positively to that. So even though it just seems like a simple walk, it's to look up, to look at the clouds, look at the skies, to get a longer view of life, and then to laugh, whether it's at the beach or down your neighborhood in the streets. That's very helpful in the healing process from trauma and just good
Right.
everyday mental wellness.
I was wondering because, like you said at the beginning, we're all different. I mean, and every family is different, and every family unit is different. And since we are talking about, I'm not talking about individuals now because we are discussing families today. Do you see, in your experience, a characteristic that a family develops or shows that is common amongst the ones who are very successful getting back to a normalcy, to get back on track with their mental well-being?
Hmm. Well, that's a great question because the characteristics are endless,
Mm,
right? Whether it's creativity or forgiveness or compassion or courage, we really look at resilient families. It takes courage to deal with trauma. It takes strength, compassion to deal with the hard issues of life and not to blame situations and blame others and have a negative mindset. So, this positive mindset that doesn't blame and takes responsibility for moving forward is one of the largest characteristics we see as the most helpful. That yes, there's things like you can blame a tornado
mm.
or you can blame some disaster. But in general, if you take responsibility for your own healing, that's one of the most important characteristics of a whole family doing that together, of understanding that we're going to deal with the issues of the day in order to be resilient, in order to recover, and not have a kind of a blaming mindset
Right.
where we're not, because that actually doesn't give you freedom. And so when you say, I want to take responsibility for moving forward, whether you're a child in your own way or a teen in your own way or a mom and dad, that's really important to seeing the big picture and moving forward.
It's
And
really
sometimes we
true.
call that a victim mindset,
Right.
this blaming. And so to not have a victim mindset, and that, yes, there's responsibility of things that happen, but looking beyond that to the future and living and looking toward the future.
That's you use the word that a lot of people are afraid of when they go through a situation. That's courage, because a lot of people feel I'm just not that. I feel like I'm not courageous enough to not only go through it myself, but to help my family go through it. Guys, no one said it's easy,
Right,
but
right,
it's necessary.
right.
If you hurt your back, some of us have multiple times,
Yes, right.
or my shoulders or my
Sorry.
knees, you have to go through physical therapy. It's not easy. It's painful. It's
Right,
boring, and you really don't want to do it, but it's
right,
necessary.
right.
and finding that courage to
Yes.
help your family go through these situations, these stressful, horrible, overwhelming situations. It's not easy,
Right.
but it is necessary.
Right. Will, your illustration of physical therapy is a great one, because if you don't push yourself, and in essence, you may feel more pain at some times, right? When you're working on knees, on legs, if you're getting physical therapy, it's going to hurt, and you kind of wish you would just rather have something fun to do, but you're going to be better in the long run.
Right.
So that's a great illustration, and you to be courageous. And really, someone may say, I'm not courageous, when in essence they are. And that's why other people being around us to say, Will, you were courageous to go through that physical therapy at the level you did.
Right.
And you might not have felt it at the time. So someone else calling it out is really important.
And that's true also for the mental health of the family.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't realize that, yeah, it's you. Yeah,
Right.
you're the
Right.
one that's actually helping people along. It
Right.
doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be out there. Sometimes
Right. Right.
a very quiet word, a very
Right.
quiet support, a
Right.
little encouragement, but
Right.
it coming from you it's what really can help. And
Yeah.
I think we forget that sometimes. Like I said before, we're never really trained to do that as people because
Right.
nobody wants to talk about it.
Right.
Just,
Right.
nobody wants to talk about so where I live, they just went through a weather event.
Yeah.
You said a tornado, one hit less than a mile from my house, and
Wow.
which is never ever happened here in South
Wow.
Florida, ever.
Right. Right.
And we've hit hurricanes. We're so used to it. We have hurricane parties. Tornadoes were something else.
Right.
And we've seen a lot of families and seen the community come together. It's a wonderful thing. I was so happy to see that and help people. Um, I, you would be surprised where you can find your courage from.
Yeah.
And that courage gives us something else that you speak about often, and that is hope. You have to be able to have the courage to have hope
Right. Right.
that you're going
Right.
to come out of this.
One other thing that you're reminding me of is that we need wise decision making in the middle of trauma and then afterwards. I bet you saw that in the middle of tornado. To be able to work as a family on your skills of wise decision making, to be able to remain calm, this idiom, calm and collected, means you're prepared, you know what to do. So to prepare your children, to prepare our families that if something happens, here's how we're going to have wise decision-making skills. We're going to remain calm, we're going to remain collected, and we're going to use what we've learned in the past to make wise decision-making skills in the middle of a, tornado, or in the middle of when someone's teasing me at school, when someone's doing something that is harmful to me. How can I have wise decision-making skills?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer, how to have those wise decision making. I guess you do the best you can,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And lastly, I want to talk, because we're running a little long, but I wanted to ask you for some advice. You are in a very unique position, because not only have you seen families go through real stressful events of grief, events where people have lost everything, their homes, health issues. You have seen it all over the world. If you were to pick out, say, 5 things, no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, that your families who are currently facing trauma, and they're out there. Some of them
Yes,
hopefully are listening to this.
yes.
Where do they find that strength? We touched on a bunch, but if you were to pick a few, say, do this, because sometimes people need to be told. here's the list. Do this first.
Right, right, right.
So you
Well,
can have a positive future.
I would say, here's how I like to picture this, because you asked for a number of things. What would families need if they're facing trauma right now? What advice would you give them? I would have them picture, this, if you have ever been on a physical obstacle course, that ups and downs, the ropes, the mud, the easy stuff, the hard stuff. I would picture trauma like an emotional obstacle course, and that it is going to be hard and it is going to be messy, and you're going to run through mud and you're going to have to climb the rope and up over the wall, all like emotions, all in emotions, and some physical and some just spiritual or some mental. And so one of the things of why we talk about resilience is because you have to be able to keep handling one thing after another, feelings, situations. And so picture yourself going through an emotional obstacle course, and that's why it takes the elements of courage, that why it takes the element of having a new possibility. And so here's some of the lists. Like, you have to keep looking to the future of new possibilities, of a new vision for the future. You have to be able to communicate and process and get your feelings out and your thoughts out. And so there's going to be the need to communicate, the need to process, the need to have good decision-making skills and not have a victim mindset. And so all these key things, that vision for the future, the new possibilities, the communication, the exercise. Why I like to use this is because we would be so surprised how much good exercise helps us. So you have all these pieces come together: the exercise, the nutrition, the family relationships, good relationships that you trust. And one of the key things, we started the podcast this way, but a family needs to be that safe place. So one of the key pieces of advice is, how is my family safe in the middle of this? So how can I grow and move? How can I get through this emotional obstacle course in a safe place in my feelings, safe place at home, so that I can talk all those things through? Because it is going to be like an athlete. It's going to be like your physical therapy. And sometimes someone's going to say, I'm done. And disagreements happen and arguments happen. And that needs to be okay. And then we come and we talk that through, and we work through what has to happen moving forward. So I don't know if that completely gives you a picture and an answer with some specifics in the middle of it, but we're really working toward a hopeful future.
Right. And that's exactly what people need to understand, is that they're working on a future. And
Right.
you have to do certain things, like you say, good decision making in a time of chaos.
In a
Because that's
time
what
of
this
chaos.
is.
Yes.
The calmer heads are going to prevail. And if you're out there and your family is going through hell right now, well, like Dr. Jernigan's just said, take a moment, make sure you're doing these things. First of all, and foremost, make sure your family's physically safe.
Yes.
Get out of whatever situations here. You can imagine some of the stories I heard of the tornadoes and the hurricanes around here. First of all, and once that's over,
Mm-hmm.
remember that your family is now physically safe. Take a moment to reflect on that too. And now rebuild, your resilience, and now rebuild your family unit and come together as that. I think the advice you gave us today, Nancy, is invaluable. It's worth its weight in gold, because when something like this does happen, the last thing you're thinking of is in terms of making smart decisions. You're like your head's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
You're making decisions like your hair's on fire. Try not to do that.
Right.
Try to work your way back to a structure and normalcy, and okay, make a list.
Right,
Make a
right,
list is a great thing to do. It helps you to know what to do next. That's always
right,
been the big thing for me. All right, what do I do now?
right,
What do I do next?
right.
And all the things that Nancy have said today make a lot of sense. Do things together. Make sure you're eating right. Make sure you're keeping yourselves healthy and both mentally and physically, and work your way back. And most important, read her article in Contentment Magazine. I think you'll get a lot out of that too. So I ask all my guests, I'm going to ask you, this is the last question. What does Nancy Jernigan's do when she's feeling stressed out?
Um, my greatest go-to is to either play tennis, pickleball, or take a good walk. I tell you, exercise can shift my thinking in a heartbeat. And if you can do that with someone else, so you're talking through life and talking it through
Right.
with a safe person. Um, I often will tell Jeff, you know what, I'm going to be a much better mom and wife and friend if I can get all this energy out. So that's my go-to. Even though I am an athlete, I played tennis all through college and after college. It really is part of my go-to. And then because I do have a faith, I know not everybody does, but if you have a faith, reading your Bible or reading something of encouragement, really, and being able to pray. We didn't really talk about that, but if you are a person of faith, to be able to pray and release those thoughts of stress is a beautiful way to handle both trauma and even preventing further stress down the road.
Thank you. Those are great answers. And if you don't pray, you can meditate. You can do a lot of
Yes,
different things. But the
yes,
physical aspect of it, I'm always a big believer in it. And, as you are in different stages of your life, that that sport or that physical activity that you're doing take on different meanings.
yes,
I'm no longer trying to win tournaments.
right.
Now I'm
Me
just doing
neither.
it because it's social and it's good, and I'm
Right.
with my friends and I get to talk and I get to yell at them. They get to yell at me. It's great. And I was out.
Hmm.
No, it wasn't.
Right, right.
It's a great thing to do. Nancy, thank you so much for doing this and talking to us today. I think anybody who takes a moment and reads your article and listens to what you have to say, all of it will be helpful. If you're out there and you're going through a stressful event, no matter what it is, all of the things that Nancy said today are going to be a big help. So thank you. I appreciate your advice. Certainly, it's going to be a great help to people that are listening and watching.
Thanks, Will. It was an honor to be with you today, and I hope that we'll hear great stories of people healing and figuring out how they, in turn, in their unique ways, deal with stress and trauma.
And don't forget that a lot of people have gone through it, and there is a light
Yes.
at the end of that
Right,
tunnel.
right.
There is hope, and we want you to have
Yes,
hope. You can
yes,
get through this.
yes.
And that's going to do for us today. This has been your host, Will Heckman. I want to thank you all for joining us again today. Hey, and don't forget, please follow the podcast, subscribe, join AIS, take a look at stress.org. And I want to remind everyone, just as I said, just as Nancy said, that stress is different for each of us. And there's no one stress reduction or management strategy that's right for everyone. So please make sure that you join us next time as we explore more stress management strategies and insights on the next show. And we'll see you at next time on Finding Contentment. Good day, everyone.